some of the rest of it is.
Oh, good. Very good. All right.
Ta-da! All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to the Meat and Potato Show, Conservative Talk and Awesome Rock. I am your host, Christopher Maynard, and we are filming this interview from the fourth floor of the Liberty, the Osgood building on 18 Bradford Street at the Liberty Clubhouse. And I've spoken to this woman before, and she's been at a few of the Tea Party meetings, and I contacted her. She is a tax accountant. She's also runs an organization. It's a website mostly right now, but she does a lot of seminars all around the state, speaking engagements. She has, according to what we see here, you have people joining you on locations and dates. But anyway, let's get the guest introduced here. Catherine White, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I'm so glad we were finally get together on this. I want to start, as I said earlier off the microphone, you started a book club, book study group, Moms as a Mom group, Outgrowth of the 912 Project. I'm going to let you again take over the microphone here and just introduce yourself and tell everybody about how you got started here, and tell us about how you got started with Constitution Decoded.
Okay, well, my name's Catherine White. I'm a tax accountant. I live in Lexington now, although I lived in Worcester for many years and still think of Worcester as home. So it's really great to be back. A number of years ago, I think it was late 2008, early 2009, I started with a couple of friends a book study group. We were going to read Cleon Skousen's book, The 5,000 Year Leap.
Right.
And so I got a little room at the library, and we met, and it sort of took off on its own, and we went from the 5,000-year leap to a study of the Constitution, because they really tied in. You know, the 5,000-year leap is about the Constitution.
Really?
Sort of
I've
hard
never
to,
read that book, actually.
It's really
This
fabulous.
is something it's got to go on my list, and we'll talk about one thing there. Well, go on, sorry.
No, that's okay. And out of that little group grew a monthly study group that meets second Monday of every month at the Woburn Sportsmen's Association in Bedford. And we now get upwards of 40 people a month who show up for 2 hours on one Monday a month. And we start at the beginning and we go all the way to the end, and then we go back to the beginning and we start again.
On this book here?
No,
Okay.
on the Constitution.
On the Constitution.
On the Constitution.
So this is basically how it just morphed into Constitution Decoded. You started the website, obviously.
I started the website. I got asked to write articles for the e-zine Minute Mom, and so I wrote a whole bunch of articles on the Constitution. A lot of them are still there online, but most of them have been ported to pages on my site at this point, because it was just, I let the e-zine have them for a while, and then I put them on my site for ease. And it's probably about 12 articles at this point. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and someday when they're all written, I'll flesh them out a little more and publish them as a book.
I was going to say, really, exactly. You've got enough there already, sounds like.
And then again, from somebody who was at my study class, put me in touch with someone who was looking for a speaker, and all of a sudden, poof, I'm doing speaking engagements.
Sure.
I've been out here in Worcester a couple of times. I've been as far as Pembroke. I've been asked to talk down on the Cape, but we haven't, made the arrangements yet. As far north as Andover, a couple of times in Boston.
And what's your demographic? What type of groups of people are calling? Are they mostly Tea Party groups, or is it just pretty much anybody getting hold of you?
At the moment, it's mostly Tea Party groups,
Right.
but I've also spoken at several colleges from people who had a professor who was interested and who taught classes where it was appropriate.
How are you? We all know about tends to be a lot of liberal bias on college. How were you treated on that? How were you welcomed, I should say?
I was welcomed fine. I was treated fine. The worst I found was a couple of silly kids with a lot of eye rolling. It's like,
Yeah.
I raised a couple of kids myself. You can't get to me with eye rolling.
Exactly. Let's look at the website here. Right on the homepage here. Welcome to the homepage of the U.S. Constitution Decoded. Our government, under the Constitution, is the first and only government ever founded on the ideal that political power is sovereign in the people. We do not work for or belong to the government. It works for us. The Declaration of Independence set forth the principles of the then new country. The Constitution puts those principles into action. The preamble of the Constitution is the mission statement for the document, and the government. It clearly states that the purpose for which the 13 colonies joined forces and became one nation was to, quote, and it's in the Constitution, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And you've done a lot of reading on the Constitution. I've been reading Dumas Malone's biography on Jefferson. It's a 4-part series. This is the second book here. I actually found this like at a yard sale. I got it for like a quarter or something like that. And even though Jefferson was in France during the time of the Constitution, we all know that Jefferson contributed a lot to the French Constitution, what we know as the rights of men. And he and Madison were constantly exchanging letters, and he gave whatever input he could.
He also wrote the first draft of the Declaration of
Of
Independence.
course he did. That's right, of course. Now these guys, it was the first time, as you say even on your website, it's the first time in history that something like this ever happened. Man had lived under tyranny and under monarchies. The common man was always the serf, the government, the nobles, the clergy, they always ruled everything. You were lucky to get a break anywhere. Now, not only was what they did revolutionary, I happen to believe, you can agree or disagree, but I want you to expand upon it, I think it's evolutionary. I mean, it's like in your book, the 5,000-year leap here. This was something that had never happened before, and as far as I can tell, as much as countries try to democratize and supposedly break chains of tyranny, there is no other country and no other constitution like our American Constitution. Take it from there.
There is no other country, there is no other constitution, yes. What we really don't understand in this country is that freedom is very rare and very precious and very special. Most of the world, except for the people who have lived in this country since we broke free from England, have lived under one degree or other of tyranny.
Right.
Some of it has been relatively benign tyranny. For example, the people who lived in Britain under King George, not the colonies, because we were seen as a cash cow,
right.
as well as, well, George had a lot of problems. We won't
Yeah, George was a little wacky.
Yeah, the poor man, and he also had some very poor advisors, and we could spend an entire hour on just King George. But if you lived in Britain in those times, it was a relatively benign tyranny, but it was still a tyranny. The king is in charge, and yes, there was Parliament, and yes, there was the House of Lords, the House of Commons. Still, rights were vested in the king. Now, here we need to make a slight digression.
Go ahead.
Because to preserve these rights, and this is a key thing, and one of the books that we always use in my study group is Michael Badnarik, who was the 2004 Libertarian candidate for president. His book, Good to Be King. And in it, he makes chapter 2, which is the crucial difference between rights and privileges, free, available on the internet. It's linked on my site. He gives the definition of a right from Black's Law Dictionary, which is a power, faculty, or demand inherent in one person, or the powers of free action. Again, inherent,
Right.
built into you. Our rights come to us, as the Declaration states, from our Creator. If you're an agnostic or atheist, you can take John Galt's speech from Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. It is a condition for man's existence on this earth.
Sure.
Inherent in us, predating and superseding the Constitution.
So even if, God forbid, something happens, the United States comes, goes, whatever happens, these rights, it's like oxygen, it's like water, it's like sunlight. They've been before, they will always be afterwards, they are unchanging, they simply just are.
Yes, and the key phrase here is inherent,
Right.
built into us. So it is singular to us. All right, and that'll become key in a second, because the opposite of a right is a privilege. And again, Black's Law Dictionary says that privilege is a particular and peculiar benefit or advantage enjoyed by a person beyond the common advantages of other citizens. So rights and privileges are opposites.
Mm-hmm.
All right? A right is something something you don't have to ask permission for. A privilege is something that is granted and can be revoked. So, under England, King George, he had all the rights. He was the king. He was the head, the tyrant. You know, benign tyrant for the most part, especially to people who lived in Britain. But the tyrant, he had the rights. He extended privileges to his inferiors, and he could revoke them whenever he wanted.
Certainly.
All right? So, Badnarik gives 3 corollaries to the definition of rights. And the first one is that all rights derive from property. Starting with the very first piece of property you ever own, the day you're born, your own body.
Yeah.
If you can't say what happens to your body, if you can't control what happens to your body, you are a slave. So every right then implies a responsibility. You know, your body is yours, you have a responsibility to take care of it, etc. And the only limitation on your rights is the equal rights of others. Now, there's a question you can ask when something arises: is it a right, is it a privilege? And that is, ask who owns the property.
Right.
And 99 times out of 100, that will make everything crystal clear. So when I said rights are inherent in us, and they're an intrinsic part of our being, that's a standalone. So our rights do not mean that we can compel the actions of others, because they have their own rights. Just like nobody can walk into my office and compel me to prepare their taxes this year for free.
Right.
Because that's making me a slave. Right? I have no choice. I am being forced to provide my life's effort for someone else's benefit. Now, I may choose out of the goodness of my heart to help somebody for free. That's my choice.
Sure, right.
Right? So as soon as you are compelling people, you are enslaving people. So when you talk about, the left always talk about healthcare, we're going to make it a right.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, you have your body, it's your responsibility to take care of it. But, and here's the question, who owns the property? Do you own the medical school education? Do you own the diagnostic equipment? Do you own the lab reagents for the lab tests? Do you own the medical record systems? No, you don't. So healthcare is not a right. It's something that you may need for yourself, although real healthcare is taking care of yourself. It's something that you can trade for, it's something you can purchase, it's something that you can ask for help in getting, but you cannot walk in to a doctor's office or a hospital and demand as a right that they treat you for free, because you are enslaving them. You are compelling them to provide their life's energy, their knowledge, and their services to you for no recompense.
And some of the fines that are in here, first of all, if you don't sign up for Obamacare, you're going to be fined. That's a form of coercion too. And then once you're in the system, if your doctor insists that you have a certain treatment, and just for whatever reason you do not agree to have that treatment, let's take for instance the flu shot. A lot of people are scared about that, understandable. But if you don't take it, again, you can be fined. Under the Obamacare plan, you can be fined for not taking that flu shot. Let's take another example. Part of their questionnaires during a health assessment, an intake, is they will ask you about weaponry in the house. And again, if you refuse to answer that question, then there's no more patient-doctor confidentiality.
There's an awful lot of things wrong with Obamacare.
Well, the whole thing is wrong to begin with.
The whole thing is wrong to
These
begin
little details, and the more we explore it, the more it's just.
But again,
it's a Pandora's box.
It certainly is, and believe it or not, Justice Roberts, and I'd love to know how they coerced him into changing.
How did you come up with that?
Well, he wrote the it's unconstitutional opinion, and then he turned around and wrote the it is constitutional opinion, and I'd love to know what pressure they put on him, but we will probably never know because he won't tell. However, in that it is constitutional opinion, which was just flat out wrong,
Right.
he also gave us the solution. He said, this is a case, and I'm paraphrasing here because I couldn't find the exact quote, this is a case where the remedy is in the states. And he's talking very specifically about nullification and what the states are supposed to do when the federal government usurps power.
Now,
And many states are moving to nullify.
And already,
portions
you know,
of
the
law.
states have been basically handed a hate letter from holders that they're all going to be sued, of course, and they're all going to have to face a lawsuit.
Well, let's hope that they do it the way they did in Arizona, and I'd love to see a state have a clue, because, again, here we go into the Constitution. Article 3 of the judicial states very clearly that in any lawsuit in which a state is a party, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So, for example, the lawsuit against Arizona for attempting to enforce federal law that the feds were not
Yes,
enforcing in terms of border security. Yes. Isn't it telling about the state of ignorance of our own Constitution in this country?
Yeah.
That, let me tell you,
Yeah.
nobody in that case, not the state of Arizona, not the judges for the state of the judge in the case, none of the lawyers for the state of Arizona, none of the lawyers for the federal side, not one of them knew the Constitution well enough to stand up in front of the judge and say, I move that this case be dismissed because it says in Article 3 that in all cases where a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction, and you, Your Honor, have no standing to hear this case. It's the wrong court. You must dismiss.
Interesting. But that's not what happened, is it?
But that's not what happened because nobody knows the Constitution.
Possibly including the judge sitting on the bench.
Almost certainly. They haven't taught the Constitution in law schools in 100 years. They have taught constitutional case law, but that is meaningless because case law is based on precedent. And here's a very interesting bit. If you talk to medicine, if you bring them case histories, they call it anecdote and dismiss it out of hand. But in law, it's called precedent, and it becomes as though it were carved in stone. But the problem with precedent, well, there's a whole bunch of problems with precedent. The first one is that Madison and Jefferson both said many a time that in any case of the Constitution, you have to go back to original intent, because you can take anyone's words and twist them out of shape and make into them anything you want. But when it comes to the Constitution, they said over and again, go back to original intent. What was intended? What did they mean to do? What was meant at the time? What were the states agreeing to? What were the people agreeing to? That's crucial. And when you start on precedent, the first decision may be 98% in line with the Constitution. It's off just a little bit. But the next decision that's based on that is going to be off a little bit more. And the next decision's off a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And after 100+ years, you're so far away from the original Constitution that you're nowhere near it. Justice Story, who was one of the first Chief Justices of the Supreme Court, warned against that many times in his commentaries on the Constitution, that you can't do that. You have to go back to original intent because you can basically create an entirely new Constitution just by disregarding the existing one and basing decisions on prior decisions that weren't quite right, that weren't quite right, that weren't quite right, some more.
It's like a copy of a copy of a copy of a, after a while it just degrades.
Yes.
And that's
and if you're a Trekkie and follow this, there was a case where they were, clone people, right? And they came up with this thing called replicative fade, where after a while, if you clone something enough, the clone eventually becomes non-viable because the errors creep in.
Right.
Well, we've got constitutional replicative fade going on here. And we have to go back to the original.
And here's the thing too. In Elizabeth Price Foley's book, The Tea Party: Three Principles, there's limited government, unapologetic American sovereignty, and constitutional originality. Even with any mistakes. And here's the thing that a lot of the liberals do. They always like to point out mistakes in the Constitution, or maybe an amendment in the past that was the things. They always like to point out Jim Crow. They always like to point out the 3/5 clause. without understanding the history behind it. But what Elizabeth Price Foley was saying, no, you have to go back to the original intent of the Constitution, because even with the mistake, it was something that was going on at that time. It might not necessarily apply today, but you have to go back to the originality, and you must look at it for the word and take it by its word, and try to make that original clause work for what you're going on today. Am I correct? Am I off on that?
No, that is completely correct. And you brought up a couple of really interesting points when you said Jim Crow and the 3/5 clause. Now, the Jim Crow laws, first of all, those were state laws.
Mm-hmm.
They were...
I'm just saying the libs like to always bring that up.
They were put in place by the Democrats.
Sure.
The other thing is that the Constitution promises that we would not make slavery illegal before 1808,
Sure.
which was a compromise at the time. It was 20 years, basically a generation at that point, and it was to keep the slave-holding states in the Union.
Sure. Yeah, there had to be a compromise.
There had to be a compromise, but let me finish my thought here. The promulgation of slavery past 1808 required the collusion, at least, and the power of the central government. For those who abhor slavery, which should be all of us, that's another warning that you don't want a strong central government. If you look at the history of the expansion of slavery, it was done at the bequest and at the order of Congress, and with the power of the federal government behind it. And the states, at the time already, should have been standing up and saying, no, the idea was to eventually get rid of this. We are not letting it expand into territories.
Sure.
There are some really good resources that I can point.
It was an attempt to try to phase it out. Is that what you're trying to say?
It wasn't an attempt to try to phase it out. There were all these, the Missouri Compromise, and we were letting in, one slave state for one free state and trying to achieve a balance of power. But the thing is that it required the power of the federal government to keep slavery going. So if you really abhor slavery, you want a small central government. Now, the other thing that you gave was the 3/5 clause, and this one is always dangled by liberals saying, oh, 3/5 of a person, 3/5 of a person, the evil, evil, evil. Well, let's take a look at the 3/5 clause. It's part of the census clause. All right?
Wait till you hear this. I think I know exactly what you're going to say, because I've looked into this myself.
Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, indentured servants, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. So, it's not saying that a slave is worth 3/5 of a person. It's saying that for the purposes of assigning the number of representatives in the House of Representatives, you're going to take 60% of the number of slaves and count that as population. This was an abolitionist clause, because if you had counted, if from the start they had counted every slave as one for the purpose of assigning representation, the slave-holding states, and when the Constitution was written, 9 of the 13 states were slave states. 9.
Yeah.
The slave-holding states would have had so much power in the House that they could have forced the adoption of slavery throughout the country.
Exactly. They would have a supermajority.
They would have had a supermajority. The northern states wanted none of the slaves to be counted. The free states wanted no slaves to be counted for purposes of assigning representation. The slave-owning states wanted all slaves to be counted for the purposes of assigning representation. But even here, they did something really, really clever. And I mean, these guys were just brilliant. Let me go back to it. Representatives and direct taxes. That was the only form of taxation that we had, was direct taxes, or what they call a capitation tax. Count the number of heads, right? And you know, each head is worth $10 worth of tax. Here's the bill to the state. So state, you know, you've got 100 people, you're $10 a head, your tax bill to support the federal government is $1,000. Figure out for yourself how you're going to collect it, but we get $1,000. So the other piece, it was carrot and stick. You get representation, but you also pay tax based on the number of slaves that are being held. So the southern states had, or the slave-owning states had a strong incentive to undercount the slave population to lower their own tax bills.
Sure.
Which was a huge surprise when we got to the Civil War, because they figured there was like 1 million slaves and it was closer to 6.
But why?
This clause also gave legal standing as persons to slaves, which was this was a first time ever that slaves had been considered legal persons. There's no precedent in law
Even
before
as
this.
counted as so-called 3/5, that still indicates that you are
Yes.
this person.
Yes. Prior to that in law, there was no precedent for considering slaves as persons.
Why do academics, people on the left, our own government, why do they keep trying to look for these types of mistakes, exploit these types of mistakes, or as they perceive them to be mistakes? And why do they try to look and point and say that, oh, see, the Constitution isn't all this that it's cracked up to be? In fact, we've even heard that our own president saying that it's a flawed document. Why does this happen? Is this purposeful? Is this something that has just evolved over time? Like you said, you know, as we go along, people know less and less about the Constitution, or has it gotten to the point now where it is purposeful?
It is definitely purposeful. At the beginning, it was sort of accidental, and Alexis de Tocqueville wrote on democracy in America, which is actually not right. We're not a democracy. We are a republic. A republic is based on laws that no vote of the majority can overturn. Democracies are mob rule. They are lynch mobs. Anytime you have the tyranny of
wolves and sheep
deciding what to have for dinner, yes.
And
the riots in Greece last year were unfettered democracy in action. We are a republic. But Alexis de Tocqueville, he talked about, you'd go into the village tavern, and people just sitting there would be discussing the Constitution and talking about how it applied and what it meant. There's a great story that you can find online, and again, I think I link it on my site. If not, I'll have to add it, where Davy Crockett, you know, like the Alamo Davy Crockett, he was up for re-election to Congress, and he got a lecture on the Constitution and why he wasn't going to be voting for him from a farmer, and the farmer was right.
Right, exactly.
And he learned his lesson and went back and said, you know, if you will vote for me, I promise that I will not only take this to heart, but go back and teach it. But what happened? Part of this was
I forget what the story was too.
The story was that there was a big fire in the Capitol, and Congress voted some money to help people, and that's not in the Constitution.
That's right.
And it's a great
And
story.
he apologized. And I remember that he apologized. He said it was done with the best of intentions. And I think the farmer who was talking to him said, "I understand that, and I completely agree with you, but it still doesn't apply." In fact, I think this is one of the problems that a lot of people have with our Constitution. They see it as this cold, stone foundation that is immovable. It's purposely designed to be like that, so that we don't have runaway welfare programs. Well, at the same time, we don't have runaway tyrannical government. It protects us on both ends.
Here again, let's go back and take a look at the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable, inherent, inseparable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and property. To secure these rights, governments are instituted. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right and the duty of the people to alter or to abolish it. So the only purpose of the federal government is to secure our rights. That's the only purpose they have. Everything else was left to the states and the people, as is clearly stated in Amendments 9 and 10. Everything else. The federal government was only given jurisdiction over a very few areas where a united front was required. And that would be areas such as national defense, interactions with other states, and then a few other things like uniform currency, uniform weights and measures, uniform tariffs, uniform this, that. Basically, and we go to the preamble here to the Constitution. What were they trying to do? Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty, right? So their only job is to provide a stable platform on which people in their states can build their lives. That's their only job, a stable platform. Everything else is up to us and our states. So when people say, oh, you conservatives, you want people to starve in the streets, no.
It's actually all of our responsibility as a community. It is
our responsibility, and we specifically created through the Constitution a federal government that did not have jurisdiction in those areas. That was done purposefully. And the reason is because it is our moral responsibility as humans to take care of the people around us. We cannot outsource that job to a government agency and expect it to be done right.
Done efficiently.
Well, and the other thing is that what's this point of sending $1,000 to the federal government in the hopes of getting $400 back in aid
to the individual, right?
To somebody or other, and it breeds inefficiency, waste, and fraud because the government itself, it puts out every year this little guide on how to just choose a good charity, and if it doesn't put at least 80% of the money towards the charitable purpose, find somebody else. So if you're doing that with a charity and you're giving money to the Jimmy Fund, and you find out that they're wasting 3/4 of it, well, you can next year give your money to St. Jude's, right, or Dana-Farber, or somebody else, somewhere else. If it's the government and they're taking it from you in tax money, it doesn't matter how inefficient and how wasteful they get, they're still going to get the money. So that's immoral. The other piece, if you really care about people, is a bureaucrat hundreds or thousands of miles away cannot possibly know what's needed here in Massachusetts or here in Worcester. Right. So you're guaranteeing that the money is going to go to people who don't deserve it and don't need it, and you are equally guaranteeing that people who do need help are not going to get it. Yeah. All this at the cost of huge waste. So people who really need help are not going to get help because the money is being wasted on those who don't deserve it.
And there seems to be a big push.
And that's disgusting.
It is disgusting. It seems that there's a big push to remove faith-based charities, Catholic charities. I was going to expand upon what you said about how the federal government has no clue 1,000 miles away what is needed here in Worcester. Whereas I know there's a church right over here. They have food pantry, they have homeless shelter, they serve hot meals, they get all sorts of donations from local businesses in and around the area, and they feed hundreds, if not thousands, of people almost every week. There's clothes coming in, going out left and right. They know the people. They even have some of the homeless people, some of the other people who are, in trouble, might not necessarily be homeless. They just want to belong to something. They're all coming together and they're working in this church, which is right around the corner from here. But you're right. I mean, the government would just send a check to an agency, and that agency would determine if you are eligible.
Yes.
And it doesn't work. This is why we have all these people they're all falling through the cracks.
And they become petty tyrants themselves. Let me tell you a case here in Worcester of a family that I know, this was a number of years ago, where they were poor as church mice. I mean, really living hand to mouth. And they applied for fuel assistance. And somebody from the state came in to do the home assessment, the audit. And her determination was that I don't see how you people can exist on the amount of money that you're getting. You must be hiding funds. And what's more, if the next time I come back, it isn't warmer in this house, I'm going to have DSS take your children away from you.
This is the other thing too. I was going.
Why were they applying for fuel assistance? They really were getting by on that little. And what the idiot state worker refused to consider was that this family actually knew how to live lean.
Sure.
They lived on rice and beans and lentils. They did not have $100+ cell phone contracts. They did not have $100+ a month cable bills. They had no cable television. They had no cell phones. They had next to nothing, and they were living on next to nothing. And they were doing, frankly, okay, except they needed help. They were hanging on. They needed a little help with heat. And here comes in someone from an agency that's supposed to help, who threatens to take the children away because because they don't meet her standards.
Yeah, let's get into that. I've been working on several pieces in my blog. I've been talking about Common Core. I've been talking about SSRI drugs being handed to our kids. There's a situation going on here in Worcester East Middle School. There are individuals, I'm not going to name names because I'm still working on this situation. There is some shenanigans and some corruption going on there, and I'm working on this. But when you started talking about this is why I made that face, because this is an epiphany that I've come from. When you go into court, when you argue a case, the state versus, and I'm not talking about a crime like a murder or whatever. I'm talking about, like, let's take your situation. Let's say that person who was yelled at by the state worker said, well, I want a fair hearing. You can get, about the fair hearing process. They go into court and they go into a fair hearing. This is where our Constitution goes right off the cliff. The state instantaneously assumes the role of, we're in charge, we've made the ruling, we're correct, now you prove why.
And that's because we have statutory courts instead of common law courts.
Whereas the Constitution, it states right there, promote domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare. Your job as a government official, as a government worker, is to help me work this out. You're not supposed to be biased in your case to begin with. You're actually supposed to say, you know what, this guy's obviously got a complaint. We need to hear his complaint. We need to maybe not necessarily be biased towards him, but what they are, and you know this, they're always biased to themselves.
Yes.
They always, in fact, when it comes to DSS or child welfare or probate court, one of the things I learned when I got divorced years ago, and reason number 6,942 why I'm no longer a liberal, is when I went in, the whole probate court, the whole family court, their standard of burden of proof is low. Everything is already defaulted in favor of the mother. The jurisprudence in not necessarily civil court, but criminal court, there really is that level playing field. The defense has to put a up a really good defense and prove that their client did not do what he's accused of, but the state is implored to prove beyond reasonable doubt. In family domestic court, no, you're already guilty. You have to come in and prove why we shouldn't take your children away, why we shouldn't give custody to your ex. My argument was, you know, if my ex wants to leave me, fine. I'll help you pack. I'll even put gas in your car. You need first month's rent, there you go. But the child doesn't want to leave. The child's perfectly happy. He's got friends next door. He doesn't want mommy and daddy to split up. Well, no, Mrs. Maida, you don't seem to understand. I was like, no, I don't think you understand. She wants to leave, fine, bye. Have a good day. But don't go to court with a stacked deck against me saying, well, you know, you're going to have to pay child support. It's like, look, I don't want this. My child does not want this. She wants this. Let her go do whatever she wants. In fact, if I get custody, I don't even want child support. Just go live your life and leave us alone. But that's not what the situation is. Everything is always stacked, and the defendant quite literally is really a defendant. I mean, they have to fight tooth and nail to prove themselves. I mean, the deck is stacked, isn't it? In today's courts.
It certainly seems that way, but again, we've sort of gotten off track from.
Can I go off on a tangent?
Just a little bit.
Well, we were talking about courts.
We were talking about where we went off track with the Constitution, and this is all of a piece. All right. What happened as we became a more prosperous country, especially after the Civil War, the university system expanded dramatically. We're a prosperous nation. More people wanted to go to college. We did not have enough homegrown professors. We started importing them from colleges in Europe, which still to this day, and again, if you don't go there and see for yourself, you would be astounded at how much of the class structure still exists in Europe, where, you know, the king, or these days the government, is at the top, and then there is the nobility, which sometimes is the intellectual elite, and then there are the upper classes, and then there are the peons, with most of us being the peons.
Sure.
So we brought in professors from Europe to teach in our colleges who did not understand the Constitution, who do not understand the concept of sovereignty residing in the individual, and that the government is our servant and we are the master. So that started the degradation. Then we get into the more progressive movement, which again came from socialist movements in Europe. A lot of it was based in Fabian socialism, and if you want to read about the history of a sick and twisted group that are still around, the Fabian socialists, and they were nasty.
And we'll put a link up.
Racists, eugenicists, haters of humanity, who thought that only the intellectual elite were fit to control the lives of everyone else. Well, that's absolutely antithetical to the American ideal, where even if you make stupid decisions with your own life, it's your life and you get to make them. Among other things, it may be the only way you can learn. You have no chance of learning to make better decisions. You know, what's the old adage? You know, wisdom comes from experience. Experience comes from bad decisions, right? So Fabian socialists became progressives. It was Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, who started the Progressive Party in the USA. Woodrow Wilson, who was a horrible racist, and he resegregated the U.S. military, which had been desegregated after the Civil War. He was, again, one of these people who thought government should be in charge, that he knew better than all the peons how to run their lives, and that the federal government should rule with an iron fist. Under Wilson's rule, we had a bunch of amendments that really cut into the Constitution. We had the creation of the Fed, which is extra constitutional and shouldn't exist. Then we had the 16th Amendment, which was the income tax, which gave the federal government the money with which to turn around and bribe the states into submission. Then we had the 17th Amendment, which was the popular election of senators. And this was in response to corruption at the state levels, and there was a lot of corruption. The place to address it was at the state level. Instead, they sweet-talked people into this 17th Amendment will elect the senators popularly, that'll be more fair, that'll be less corrupt, that'll be a better representation. The Senate was never intended to represent the people. The Senate is to represent the interests of the states as sovereign entities. That's why the Senate has to ratify treaties. It's not just the central federal government making a treaty for its country. No, the states as sovereign entities have veto power and agreement power on treaties, on ambassadors, on justices, on all these things, because it's a power-sharing tool. So the popular election of the senators with the 17th Amendment meant that the states lost their watchdogs. And the encroachment of federal power into areas reserved to the states dates from the passage of the 16th and 17th Amendments in 1913, along with the Fed that gave the federal government power over the creation of the monetary supply. So we had a central government that now was unchecked by the states. Any remaining reluctance on the part of senators was dealt with by bribing them, basically paying the states off. And the income tax gave them the money to pay people off. Here, you let us do this, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of your schools. And we'll give you federal funds, but you have to institute our curriculum. Mm-hmm. All the encroachments are there because the state watchdogs were gone and there was enough money to bribe. But it's a weakness in the people. Again, we had stopped studying the Constitution. Sure. And again, at this point in time, they stopped teaching the Constitution in law school as original intent. They started teaching constitutional case law, which is precedent, which eventually is no Constitution. So for over 100 years, they haven't really taught the Constitution in law schools. They don't teach it in colleges, they don't teach it in high schools, they don't teach it in elementary school, unless they're going to teach that it's a living document and they only want it to be living so they can stomp it to death. When I was back in early high school, so we're talking the early 70s.
No American government, no civics either anymore.
There's no American government, no civics. So when I was in early high school, I asked my social studies teacher, because we were talking about, something to do with American history. I said, so why is it a republic? What's the difference between a republic and a democracy? And she didn't know. Now, at the time, she seemed to me to be about 90 years older than God, which probably means that she was like in her 60s and close to retirement age. Which means that she was in college in the 30s. So already in the 30s, it was gone from the colleges. But the difference between a republic and a democracy is crucial. And what we have is a republic. So they talk democracy, democracy, democracy. No! Not democracy. Republic. Republic.
I want to talk to you about Article 5 and the Constitutional Convention. And you had mentioned our 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment. I mean, all of these things had to come about because there had to be a Constitutional Convention. There's a lot of talk of doing it again. I must admit I'm woefully ignorant of what the subject is, what the purpose of it is. I know that a lot of people are saying it's bad, so I'm going to ask you once again to just explain from there. I'm just simply going to lead you in. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Well, it's because you know, so that's why I wanted you on. I wanted you to get it on camera and try to get as much of this hashed out.
All right. First of all, I'm going to say that one of the source materials that I use, aside from Skousen and Badnarik, is a fabulous philosopher, logistician, and constitutional scholar and attorney who writes under the name of Publius Hulda. And again, I have her linked on my site. She does the most incredible analysis of the Constitution with original intent, using as her source material the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. Because Madison basically wrote down everything that happened in all of the discussions, so there's all the original intent. The Federalist Papers is what was presented to the states as justification and reasoning, rationale, and how the new Constitution was going to operate. And then the Constitution itself, which is, the Declaration of Independence is the principles. The Constitution is how are we going to apply that and take it from high and lofty ideals to something we can work with. Okay? So she's fabulous, and I would recommend, if you have any questions, to go to my site and then follow the links to her.
Sure.
Okay?
I'll post it up on the site.
Now, the first thing I want to say about the whole call for an Article 5 convention. Well, in 1787, Congress called a convention for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, which was a perpetual union that needed unanimity to pass anything. The convention instead tossed out the Articles of Confederation and wrote an entire new constitution with its own methods for ratification. It required a supermajority, but it did not require unanimity. All right? So we've been through this once before, and the results were significantly different from what Congress intended. But at that convention, who was there? George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, and 50 others.
Sure.
All right? Incredible statesmen, incredibly well-read, knowledgeable, thoughtful philosophers and men of action.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Who had read Cicero, who had read Marcus Aurelius, who had read Frederick Bastiat, who had read John Locke, who had read Thomas Paine. Where are those people today?
Oh, shit. Oh, God, yeah.
Okay? So, problem
And they
number
want
one.
to pass an amendment to the Constitution. And what is it that they want to pass? What are they
But
looking to do?
here's the thing, and this is again straight from Publius Hulda. She calls it a conspirators' campaign of propaganda against the people, using 9 techniques. Assume the major premise, appeal to desperation, claim there's a panacea, repeat for emphasis, tell a lie, fabricate legal principles, oversimplify, exploit wishful thinking, and then self-sell. So throughout this Constitutional Convention, it is assumed that the purpose of amendments is to control the federal government, that the Constitution is defective, that there is such a thing as a convention of states, which the states call and control, that the states will protect us from the federal government, and that the federal government will obey amendments to the Constitution. Well, if the federal government had any intention of obeying the Constitution, they would be obeying it now. So if we pass an amendment saying you have to obey what you swore to obey, are they going to obey it? Get real. I mean, really now. That's just stupid on the face of it.
And this is what this convention wants to try to pass.
Well, it says that we need amendments to the Constitution to make the federal government obey the Constitution.
It's already written in the Constitution.
It's already written in they're ignoring it already. So say, now, no, we really mean it now. You really have to obey it.
Are you familiar with John Nowicki's his right to refuse amendment from the Tea Party? That you have the right to refuse, that the government forcing you to buy something, that you have the right to refuse.
It's called nullification. James Madison wrote about it extensively. It needs to be done at the state level. One of the main problems here is that people do not know the Constitution, and we keep electing to our state legislatures more bozos who are only in it to pursue their own agenda and to enrich themselves instead of being the civil servants and watchdogs that they're supposed to be. So anyways, let's go back to the Article 5 Constitutional Convention. So what Article 5 says, and the Convention of States site is wrong flat out because it talks about Article 5, Section 2. There is no Section 2 to Article 5. There's one section to Article 5. So right from the get-go, they don't know what they're talking about, okay? Article 5, the first sentence, not even the second sentence, so you could say, well, they misspoke. The first sentence says, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, Okay. Provided only that you can't make slavery illegal before 1808. Okay. So there's the Article 5 Constitutional Convention call. So when you get enough of the states, 2/3 of the states, the petition Congress, Congress then has no choice. They are required to call a convention to propose amendments. But remember, the Constitutional Convention of 1777 was to propose amendments to the Articles of Confederation, or tossed it out wholesale. So first of all, we have precedent here that it can't be limited to what they claim. Now,
So
the problem.
could there be a possibility that they could have this convention and decide what they decided when they wrote the Constitution? Well, let's just throw the whole Constitution out and come up with something.
That's what they did the first time. Now here, let me go to that.
I never realized just how dangerous.
The problem is not Article 5. The problem is Article 1, Section 8, the last clause. Article 1 of the Constitution is on the powers of the legislative branch. Section 8 is the enumerated powers of Congress, the only things that Congress is given actual jurisdiction over. It's a very short list. There's only 17 items on it. But the very last clause says, they have the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or office thereof. So, Article 5 says, Congress calls the convention, and then Article 1 says, Congress makes the rules. So Congress could call this convention for proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States, and then say that they get to make the rules, and so the delegates to this convention are going to be the existing sitting representatives from the House, and that anything that they pass will be ratified by simple majority vote of the Senate.
Why am I getting a chill over that?
You should be like both shivering uncontrollably and being ready to vomit.
Yeah,
and even if
Congress makes up their own rules, I mean,
even if they said, okay, states, you each get to, let's just pick something out of our hats. States, you each get to pick 3 people to go to this convention. Who's Massachusetts going to choose? Are they going to choose Samuel Adams and John Hancock and John Adams?
No, they'll choose Lizzie Warren.
They're going to have Bonnie Flank, and they're going to have Markey, who hasn't been in Malden in 40 years, and they're going to have Pocahontas.
Yeah, Pocahontas, that's right.
Who's California going to send?
Oh yeah,
Maxine Waters and Jerry Brown and Dianne Feinstein. Who's New York going to send? Hillary?
Yeah, de Blasio now.
Yeah. Okay. Are you getting chills down your spine yet?
Admitted communist. This guy is.
Who's Illinois going to send?
I know, right?
They're going to send Rahm Emanuel and Bill Ayers. Do you want these people having anything to do with even constructing amendments? Look at the list. There is a that you can find on the internet. Again, I can link to it on my site. I can send you the link. The organizations that are supporting an Article 5 con, which is a con, so it's the Article 5 con, right, are extreme leftist groups, most of them funded by Soros organizations.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Is there any conceivable possibility that these people want to fix defects in the Constitution as opposed to toss it out wholesale? Starting with that pesky Second Amendment.
Sure, right.
Which is the only one that ensures all the others.
And here's the thing, they're actually running into major roadblocks on that.
Thank
God. Thank God. Is this an attempt to do an end run?
One of many, yes. You know, the unconstitutional acts of the current government are one attempt at end run. The executive orders. I've got a pen and I'm not afraid to use it.
Sure.
It's Congress's duty. It is Congress's duty to defund any agency or group that is not acting in a constitutional fashion. Here's the thing: the executive, as written in the Constitution, is not a particularly strong office. The president is a titular head who, receives ambassadors. You got to have somebody who's has to sign things and shake hands and make the presentations, especially when you're dealing with international affairs, right? So somebody's got to receive an ambassador. You can't have 50 guys from the different states all there being head at once. You got to have one. Think of how a town works, right? All the little wonderful towns here in central Massachusetts. You go to town meeting and you hire you vote for your selectmen. The selectmen hire a town manager. The purpose of the town manager is to implement the rules that the selectmen make and that the town votes on, as long as those are legal rules. So if the town votes to, I don't know, think of something stupid that's illegal. Require 7-year-olds to drink whiskey before breakfast, right? The town, I'm just making up something stupid, right? The town manager's job is to say, that is not a legal order, I refuse to implement it. Okay? Whereas if the town manager, the selectmen say, okay, this year we're going to pave Main Street and South Street, then it's the town manager's job to make sure that the highway department actually paves Main Street and South Street instead of West Street and North Street, right? So the legislature, the House of Representatives, because it's the representation of the people from where we're getting the money, they make the rules for spending the money. They appropriate. The Senate, as representatives of the states, say, okay, this doesn't encroach on our territory, and it's within the purview, it's within the 17 items that Congress has jurisdiction over. We will approve this. Then the president signs it. If the Senate, for example, approves something and the president gets it and says, wait a minute, this is not a constitutional duty of Congress. I don't know what the Senate was smoking that day, but obviously they weren't paying attention. Right. I'm going to veto it. It gets sent back overridden. Then the president says, okay, this is still not constitutional. I don't care how many times it's overridden. I'm not implementing. Okay? That's one of the checks and balances. Now, if the president does sign something and tries to implement, then it's the job of the states to say, you have exceeded your boundary limits. You are usurping powers that we have not granted you, because it's us, we the people and the states that created you. There's a principle in law that goes back to the Magna Carta in 1215, that the created entity is never greater than that which creates it. So we the people, through the states, create the federal government. It is our servant, and it is subservient to us. So it is the job of the states and the people to say, federal government, you have grown too big for your britches, back off. And the way that the states do that is to take unconstitutional federal laws and nullify them which is where the 17th Amendment comes into play. And the 16th Amendment is that the states have allowed themselves to be bought off,
Yeah.
bribed,
Sure.
and corrupted by the promise of federal money, which of course is never as much as was sent to the feds in the first place. Because something's got to pay for all those nice mansions in Maryland. So we send money to the federal government that's taken from us by taxation. They keep a good fat chunk of it, and then they bribe us to act against our own interest with what's left over.
What do you run?
There are 17 things wrong with this picture, and the first one that's wrong with the picture is that we, the people, don't know the Constitution. We don't know the limits that we put on the federal government, and we have forgotten that we are the ones with the sovereign power in this country, and that when the federal government outgrows and usurps power, it is up to us to say, stop.
We don't. I mean, when you do your business and when you deal with other business, I know you have individual clients and you must have businesses also. What do you hear people saying to you as far as the incredible burden of taxation? What do you hear from people? Just anything, just something that might stick out in your head, something you might have heard recently, or stories from the past that just really kind of hit you. And I'm talking about the fact that this whole thing has gotten completely out of control, that you, me, guy next door, and businesses, I mean, we have no say anymore, we have no representation anymore. Everything is just taken from us, the rules are just handed to us, obey the rule, or pay the consequences. What do you hear?
One of the things that I always do, people, when they get their taxes done, they're always, oh, how much am I getting back? Well, first of all, I disabuse them of that notion. You know, this is not free money. This is an interest-free loan you've given to the government for a year. And I show them, in fact, I highlight it on every return I give to a client, the total tax number, all right, which is the amount they get to keep. And for far too many people, if you look at your 1040, look at the line that says total tax. For most people, it's between a quarter and a third.
Sure.
It does not include the property tax you're paying on your house.
Yes.
And even if you're a renter, part of the rent that you're paying is for property tax. It does not include the excise tax in your car. It does not include all the sales taxes that you pay when you buy things. It doesn't include the state sales tax. And if you are a self-employed person, it doesn't include, well, if you're a self-employed person, you get the double whammy of what they call self-employment tax. If you work for somebody else, if you look at your pay stub at the end of the week, there's a deduction for Social Security and Medicare tax. That's only half of it. The other half is paid by your employer. So if you're self-employed, you get to pay both halves. So 7.5% times 2, 15%, right off the top. So if you're a self-employed person, right, you got laid off, so you decide you're going to go into business for yourself and try and make some money that way. 15% right off the bat is going for self-employment tax. Then even if you're not making very much money, you got 10% income tax from the feds, and then 5% from the state. Well, 15 plus 10 plus 5 is 30. 30% of every dollar that you make is going to some government agency before you take a nickel home. 30%, and that's at the lowest income brackets, if you're actually trying to make a living, as opposed to sucking at the public teat.
Right.
30%, and it goes up from there. For a self-employed person, it's actually really easy to pay more than half of your income in taxes.
Certainly, certainly. And that, again, it doesn't include what if you have to buy equipment, the sales tax on that.
Yes.
Again,
And then you get the
employment
duplicitous politicians and people on the left screaming and moaning about how, what was it? Warren Buffett pays less percent in taxes than his secretary. He's paying taxes on that money for the third time. One would hope that the rate was a little bit lower. First he had to earn it, then he had to invest it. So it was taxed when he earned, it was taxed by the corporation, then he got paid a dividend on corporate profits, and the third time that same money's been taxed.
Where do these people come up with these bizarre, statements like that? The secretary, where does this come from?
Well,
It's just bizarre.
because because you can twist fact to present a twisted and perverted picture by taking a tiny little snippet. If you just look at raw rate, perhaps, yes, he was paying a lower overall percentage of tax than his secretary, but only because he was paying tax on money that was being taxed for the third time, and she was paying tax on money that was being taxed for the first time. So you leave out that little bit. This money is being taxed for the third time. This money is being taxed for the first time. All right, so you leave out that crucial difference, and it looks like, oh, the rich are getting on, it's great.
Yeah, that millionaires myth that goes around.
Right. And Bill Whittle has a fabulous video on YouTube called Eat the Rich.
I put him on my YouTube channel.
Eat the Rich, and he talks about exactly what it will do, you know, how much difference it makes to the federal budget to take, not tax, but to take all the money from all the rich for 1 year. Watch it, it's fabulous.
I'm going to post the link on it, and it's been, I think it was like maybe 7 or 8 months ago that I actually, last time I saw her. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I think I should do that. Excuse me, I was checking my phone only because of the time. We're coming up onto an hour here.
And we haven't even really talked about the Constitution yet.
We haven't even really talked about, I mean, we've talked about some of it. I guess, you know.
Here's the capsule, the 3-second introduction to the Constitution. First article is the power of the legislature. Second article is the power of the executive. Third article is the judiciary. Fourth is state and federal interactions. The fifth is how to amend. The sixth is that it's the supreme law of the land, and the seventh is how to ratify it. And then the first 10 amendments, called the Bill of Rights, are further restrictive and declaratory sentences on limitations of the power of the federal government.
And it seems like
all of them are further limitations on the power of the federal government in favor of the liberty of the people and the privileges of the states.
And that seems to be the greater part of the Constitution, and it just seems like within the last, maybe I would say 100 years, maybe a little more, you have more education on this, that everything seemed to kind of flip. It was no longer an expansion of the rights of people and the more limitation on the government. It was more like a flip, where, well, we're now allowed to do this, and we're now allowed to do that.
And again, Publius Hulda has wonderful information on her site about that, where basically after the Emancipation Amendments, so we're talking from Amendments 13, 14, 15 on, out of roughly a dozen of them, 10 of them increased the power of the federal government.
Sure. Yeah. And getting to the 14th Amendment, but again, I think we're in a bizarro world, and I'm just going to let you answer it, take it from here. Why is it that we have this mentality that, you know, illegals come in here, and now that they're here, and somebody is born here, under the 14th Amendment, their child is a natural-born citizen, when the 14th Amendment specifically was about freed slaves?
Yeah, and here again, we have a great example of the danger of basing things on precedent. This was based on one bad decision from sometime in the 1870s, if I am remembering correctly. But if you look at the amendments, right, the 13th, 14th amendments, and they talk about natural-born citizen. Well, what did natural-born citizen mean at the time? For that, you have to go back to a philosopher named Vattel, and again, links to Vattel's work. Natural-born citizen means somebody who is born under the jurisdiction of a specific country.
Right.
Children are born under the jurisdiction of the countries of their parents, regardless of the physical location of their birth. So again, so go back to what the law was and what the understanding was at the time. You know, this has since been perverted in
It's
this
like the
country
separation
by
of church and state
bad,
thing
that doesn't
I
exist
know,
in the
I know.
Constitution. It was in a
But it's
letter
that
from
perversion,
Jefferson
right?
to a
But it's
friend.
that perversion, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, perversion in its original meaning, again, of twisting out of the proper shape. To pervert is to take something and twist it out of its proper shape. So, natural born citizen is somebody who is born subject to the laws of a specific country. Children are born subject to the laws of the country where their parents are citizens. Okay? So, obviously, the whole concept of the anchor baby is nonsense, because if you come here from Poland, right, and and I can tell you stories about, entire industries that have grown up around the anchor baby, and then going back home to live like a king off of the EBT cards from this country. But if you come here, 9.5 months pregnant and have a baby 3 days later, and you were originally from Poland or from Taiwan, or who
Well,
cares?
let's say it,
Mexico, Antarctica, Canada, Uzbekistan, Mars, who cares?
Yeah, right.
You are subject to citizenship and the jurisdiction of the laws of the country of your parents. You are not a U.S. citizen.
Sure.
That is a complete misrepresentation of the intent and the meaning of the 14th Amendment.
Have we got to the point where just everything's running amok now? Everything's just crazy. I mean, we got amnesty coming down, people want to take away the Second Amendment, and now we've got this Article 5 con thing coming down. I mean, it's lunacy now. And everyone's jumping on the bandwagon saying, oh, this is a good idea. Oh, well, I think we should. Oh, well, maybe we should.
Show me Washington, show me Madison, show me Jefferson, show me Franklin.
Show me the original intent.
Yeah. But in terms of is everything going crazy? Again, what we're seeing is 100+ years of undercutting of the Constitution really blossoming.
Sure.
And we really need, as a people, to understand the Constitution again in its original intent, and what the limitations are of the federal government, and why those limitations were put in place. They weren't put there because the founders were mean old men who wanted to push grandma off the cliff. They were there because they wanted the federal government only to have extremely limited jurisdiction in a few areas, so that you, your family, your community, your town, your county, your state could take care of everything else.
Seems as
Okay, but we need to learn the Constitution in order to restore it. And we're looking again at a generational battle. This didn't happen overnight. This is over 100 years of degradation. And the amazing thing about the Constitution is that
take another 100 years.
it may well take another 100 years. But here's the thing about the Constitution: as much damage as has been done to it, the checks and balances and the restrictions on federal power that were put into it are still holding. They are still strong. If for anyone who's read Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, they talk about Gondor, and even the end of its strength is still very strong. The Constitution is like that. Even the end of its strength is remarkably strong. And the current administration, and it's not just the current one, it's the one before that. The progressives have completely taken over the Democrat Party, but it's not far behind on the Republicans either. They've got slightly different social agendas to push, but the common thread that unites them is centralized power in the hands of the elite few in Washington running all our lives. So we need to understand why the founders wanted federal power limited. And then we have to internalize that and refuse to accept less than that from our elected representatives. Town level, state level, federal level. The last place we're going to see any substantive change is at the federal level, because that's where the rot is deepest. But we do, and again, here in Massachusetts with the loony liberals in charge, We're going to be, again, one of the last states to see substantive change. But look at the country as a whole. There are so many states that are really fighting back and there are states nullifying major provisions of Obamacare. There are states nullifying federal gun laws.
Common Core.
There are states nullifying Common Core, which is another disaster, and it's it's just propaganda to subvert the kids. And this is one that we can make good headway on in Massachusetts because as bad as the public schools are here, they're better than the rest of the country. And Common Core would be undercutting education here in Massachusetts. You can even get the liberals behind you on that one. So let's see, where have I been? Common Core, the states. I lost my train of thought. Oh well. I can just pop over to Union Station and get another train.
That's okay. No, we're getting up there. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover, something specifically that because I know, well, you've been going on, and this has been absolutely fascinating. Like I said, I've seen you at least twice, and it's unbelievable when you give a speech. But when I've seen you speak publicly at the Tea Party meetings, you're giving a concise speech. You've got a curriculum, you have your allotted time, and you get it. Which is why I wanted to get you on in this setting here, is because I knew you would do what you just did. You would just, no, don't smile and be embarrassed. I'm glad you did. Because I'm writing this, and I'm like, this lady knows so much more than me. All I'm going to do is just give her the lead in and just let her take over. And I'm talking to my wife about that. She's like, well, wait a minute, what? Is that something you do with your guests? I was like, I'm in a situation where I'm not exactly sure about my history or what I'm talking about. It's best if I just let the guests go. Why don't you you were about to do something you want to talk about?
Here's the thing about the Constitution. It's written in plain English.
It is. I've read it a few times. I just don't always understand
it. Anyone can understand it. There are explanatory articles on my website. There's some fabulous other resources out there. Publius Hilda, Michael Bednarik, Cleon Skousin. There's all sorts of really excellent resources. And the thing about the Constitution and the Declaration is that they really are a 5,000-year in the making leap into freedom and individual sovereignty. We don't see here that almost every person in the world that has ever existed has lived under some sort of tyranny and class system.
Yes.
We are the only country ever founded on the premise that political power is sovereign in the people, that the state is our servant, and that we are free to live our lives and to make of them what we will. So somebody like Dr. Ben Carson can grow up in terrible poverty and become a renowned neurosurgeon. That can't happen in Europe today.
No.
It can't happen. Whatever class you are born in, that's the class you'll remain. As for me, my degree is in Earth, Planetary, and Atmospheric Sciences from MIT.
How'd you get into taxes?
I got tired of being laid off every few years, and I put myself through school doing bookkeeping, and decided to switch tracks and become a money engineer.
There you go.
Right? But here's the thing. In Europe, today, I could not be an accountant or a tax accountant because I don't have the right degree, and you can't change tracks. Once you're in a track, you are stuck there for life. That's it. End of story. You're done.
I never knew that. It truly is what I said.
So if you're out there and you've had 2 or 3 different jobs in different fields, you can only do that in this country.
Sure.
You can only do that in this country.
It is truly an evolutionary leap. There never has been, and to this day there is still nothing else like that document.
The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are completely accessible, but moreover they are inspired documents.
Right.
Inspired. again in the original meaning of the word inspire. You know, I